If you have topics you would like to have us discuss on the Aging Well podcast, please click on the links in the episode description to send us a text or record your message or comments. We'd love to hear from you and how we can help you age well. If you benefit from the Aging Well podcast and would like to support the content financially, please click on the Support the Show link or support our affiliates and advertisers. Welcome to the Aging Well podcast. I'm Jeff Armstrong here with Corbin Bruton. In this and the episodes that follow, we will share candid discussions on aging and hear from the experts. We are here to inform and encourage as we experience, well, aging. In this episode, Corbin and I discuss the basics of core training. We define the core as the spiral line. We detail the role of stabilization, rotation and anti-rotation, flexion extension and anti-flexion extension, and multi-directional acceleration deceleration. We discuss the role of the core in agility and performance for sport and aging, and detail exercises like planks, Pallof presses, Bulgarian bags, and others, and how to use these to improve the core and age well.
We've talked a lot about different types of exercises in this podcast, especially people that are starting their journey. But one thing that we really haven't covered is core strength and core exercises. We very subtly have talked about the importance of core strength, but what is core? What are our core muscles?
Well, I mean, probably should start about what the core is not. Most people tend to think the core is the abs, right? And just kind of what surrounds the basics of the trunk, the abdomen area and the lower back. The reality is the core is everything that stabilizes the body. And I tend to kind of follow what I kind of learned from physical therapists, which is the spiral line, not to get into too much anatomy because we really can't visually depict it anyhow, but it's the muscles that run from the occipital bone, the base of the skull, down the back of the neck, kind of cross over the rhomboid muscles between the scapula and around through the serratus anterior to the abdominal obliques, down through the hip area, down all the way to underneath the foot. And you actually have muscles on the anterior and posterior side of the leg that actually more or less connect via the bone underneath the bottom of the foot, and it brings it back up and then through kind of the posterior chain back up through the erector spinae muscles to the back up to the neck. And so we have this connection of muscles that run all the way from essentially head to heel. And that is essentially our core. Those muscles all work together to stabilize the entire body in all movement. And so when I talk core, I talk all those muscles. And so we can't ignore any of those muscles when we're talking about training the core.
Well, it's really funny because a lot of people, they hear like, get your core tight, and, get those six-pack abs. And a lot of people, they think, well, I got to train my core. I got to do my crunches. I got to do my sit-ups. I got to do something on the ground where I'm contracting that rectus abdominis muscle. Now, I know your opinion on this because I've taken your class, but how do you feel about crunches, sit-ups, those type of ab works?
Yeah, I know exactly the opinion you are discussing because I've been teaching long enough and standing on my soapbox enough. And I wouldn't call it how do I feel, because it's not a matter of feeling. I think it's a much more matter of science and basic biomechanics and human physiology. That the rectus abdominis, it's a sexy muscle. Let's face it, we all would love to be able to have ours showing off. But the reality is, I always joke that if I were to be in a fight situation where I have to defend myself and I need somebody to get my back, I'm not looking around for the guy with the six-pack abs. I'm looking for the guy with the thick neck and the cauliflower ears, because I know that guy is going to be able to help me out a little bit. Where the guy with the six-pack abs will pull up his shirt, and that's about all he's going to be able to do. So the six-pack abs, they're great on Instagram and on social media. You can show them off, and, guys God bless the people that can keep themselves lean enough to show that off. A lot of that is genetic. A lot of it is just simply body composition. It has nothing to do with really how functional or strong the core is. But think about it. How often do you do that crunch motion during the day? I always joke with my students about the only time I do that motion is in the morning when I repeatedly hit the snooze, trying not to get up. The rectus abdominis and the other core muscles are really primary stabilizers of the body so that we can do the heavy stuff. You can't squat, deadlift, do the 5 basic exercises that we talk about, plus the carries, without a solid core. And we can't move well without a solid core. We'll probably talk a little bit later about Carmine's law. I've brought that up a little bit in the past. Carmine Arpaio is one of our guests on a previous podcast. And we talked about the kind of the equation that strength plus posture equals balance. And so for our aging population, those things that are really strengthening our core, strengthening our posture, and giving us the capacity to increase our overall strength, which means we're going to have less risk of falls, injuries, and other things as we age. Plus, we're going to be much more functional, able to do more activity that's going to help our longevity.
So for the average listener, what would be a good functional core workout?
Wow. There needs to be a progression within that. I think when we tend to get kind of focused on certain primary exercises when we start talking about core beyond just crunches. And so I tend to look at things like the plank as being a beginning core exercise. A lot of people, like, I do plank, I do a lot of plank. And, so we take that to the other extreme. We don't do the crunches, but we do planks to an extreme. And I think the world record now is about 8 hours for a plank. It's like, okay, what functionality is that? So you can sit in a
to get a Guinness Book of World Record. That would be
and basically that's like saying you've learned the technique to be able to sustain that position with the least amount of energy expenditure to the muscles, and good for you, but it doesn't function for us in day-to-day life. And to me, it's almost like, okay, great, I can do a 5-pound dumbbell curl for 8 hours or thousands of repetitions, but that doesn't translate into anything, right? So we want to be able to take it to a next level so that we're going to progress and improve our capacity to do more stuff, right? And so the plank is something that we need to first master in developing a strong core. And the plank, for our listeners who might not be aware, is basically where we are in a position, a neutral spine position, which means that your natural curvatures are lined up, your body is in a straight line, basically from head to heel, and you're on your toes and on your elbows. Your elbows are positioned just under the shoulders, and you're holding that entire core tight to maintain that stable position for an extended period of time. And by an extended period of time, I don't mean hours. I don't even mean minutes. I think, once you can do a good plank for a minute, 2 minutes tops, you're in a position to start progressing that somehow to make it more difficult or moving on to more difficult core types of movements.
Well, that's really interesting because for me, I think a push-up plank is a lot easier than doing one on your elbows. I feel like your elbows, your core is way more engaged than it is for a push-up. So I think a push-up plank would actually be a more beginner phase of that plank. But you're suggesting, have it be more on the elbows more to start off with?
Yeah, I would say that, a push-up plank is probably more of a sub-beginner type of exercise. If you cannot do a proper plank for a short period of time, it doesn't have to be that long. That's why I think, we get all worked up about duration of it, but it's more the technique. It's kind of like the push-up versus the modified push-up. If you can't do a push-up, drop to your knees, you decrease the lever arms, and it makes it a little bit easier, and you hopefully can do a better, more proper push-up from that position. Same with the plank. If you can't maintain a good, proper plank position, then go up to a push-up plank. It's going to make it a little bit easier. You're changing the lever arms. But once you get to a certain point there, you got to ultimately drop down to the elbows and begin to progress from there. And a lot of people then, their progression is just keep adding time. And I've seen a lot of these plank challenges. It lasts like an entire month, and it just keeps adding duration of time to it. And it's like, so what? So you can do it further. You got to get stronger, not necessarily just the endurance. I mean, you need some endurance, but we're getting the endurance of the stabilization by walking upright. I mean, that's what makes us human. We have that capacity to walk in a vertical position, and so we're utilizing that core muscle. But if it doesn't get stronger, we just kind of get better at holding those poor positions for longer periods of time. And so I like to progress the difficulty of the plank, and we can do that by simply moving the elbows more forward and possibly even moving them closer together so that we are changing the lever arms and making it a little bit more difficult. And when we do a plank, we really want to be focused on a good cue that I learned is to kind of pull the elbows towards the toes. Again, you're not bending at the trunk, but you're contracting those ab muscles. And so the thought of kind of pulling the elbows and the toes together is going to tighten up those muscles. And it's getting fatigued, and it should fatigue in a fairly short period of time. One of my favorite plank workouts is what I call just my Tabata planks. Tabata with the air quotes. It follows that general pattern of the 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off. So you do 8 cycles of that. And that could be pretty strenuous. In 4 minutes, you get, 8 different repetitions of a 20-second plank. And again, if it's getting easier after, 4 minutes of that, then you progress to a more difficult plank position. And eventually then, once we've mastered the plank and it's becoming easier, we need to start looking at, okay, well, what do we focus on next? And how do we progress our core training beyond just that stabilization? And so the next functions of the core are anti-flexion, anti-extension, and anti-rotation, which is essentially kind of what we're doing with the plank, but now we can bring that into some more difficult types of movements. One that I really like is the Pallof press, and I think we'll just have to probably link a video of a Pallof press to that. There's many variations that you can do within the Pallof press. You can do it standing, you can do a split stance, you can do it kneeling. But essentially what you're doing is you have something that's pulling your body in rotation. So oftentimes it'll be done with just like a band, or you could do it from the cables on a machine at the gym. And you pull that so the weight is, the handle of the cable is directly in front of your body. And the machine or the cord or whatever the resistance is pulling your body in rotation. And so you're fighting that in anti-rotation, and then you just kind of press your hands forward in front of you. And that extends the lever arm, makes it a little bit more difficult in terms of the anti-rotation. And that's a very, very good exercise for the next progression. And you do maybe sets of 15 of those on
Now, you're talking about
each
this
direction.
in a standing position, right?
You can be standing. You can progress it to kneeling. Neat thing with the Pallof press, too, is you can vary it in terms of the angle of pull. So you might have your cable set low, and it's pulling you kind of rotationally and downward, so in a more oblique direction. You can have it horizontal. You can have it pulling from above. And so by varying that, you're varying the load on your core muscles and activating the muscles a little bit differently. And so that is a very good core exercise, very good anti-rotational type of exercise in order to help strengthen the core.
So back to plank-wise, making it more difficult, more challenging, changing the angle of which the stress is on those core ab muscles. What's your opinion on this Instagram fad that's going on about the planche plank, where it's a plank position, but your hands are actually facing backwards. The position is closer to your hips, and your feet are off the ground. So you're almost like parallel with the ground, your whole body. The only thing that's holding you up is your hands, and that level of core strength there. What would you say to the listeners that are like, well, it's progressive overload, I want to advance, I want to get to that level of core strength? What would you tell them?
Once you kind of mention Instagram, it usually kind of deflates my opinion of whatever it is, because it becomes showy. I mean, unfortunately, the things that are most beneficial in exercise are the things that are the least sexy and are, the least Instagram worthy. And people don't want to do that. They want to do the stuff that's all flashy and showy and stuff. And obviously that position takes some level of core strength. But for what purpose? I mean, other than to get yourself an Instagram following, it really becomes much more a matter of technique and finding the right fulcrum position to balance. You think of kind of balancing a seesaw is essentially what you're doing. And balancing a seesaw doesn't come down to the strength of the wood or whatever material is used in the plank of the seesaw. It's where that fulcrum is positioned and how much weight is, balanced on either side. And so that really becomes much more of a technique thing. And, this is why, gymnasts, you're not just a good gymnast because you're strong. You're a good gymnast because you have good technique. And that's essentially what you're kind of doing with something like that. And for me, I think it becomes a bit more of a waste of time in the gym to spend trying to master that technique that is not building your overall core strength. Go on to the next unsexy thing that's going to make your core stronger and allow you to do kind of the bigger movements. I discussed my epigenetics test with True Diagnostic co-founder Hannah Wendt in episode 162. Epigenetic testing measures baseline and changes in your pace of aging, giving you the power to steer your anti-aging or health and wellness journey in the right direction. I learned that I am aging well. Click on the affiliate link in the episode description, use the promo code AGEWELL, and receive a 12% discount on your epigenetics test and monitor your pace of aging.
So unless you're a gymnast or you're just training calisthenics for that aesthetic look, kind of stay away from what you see on the internet. Well, that's a good point. It's a good topic that we're talking about, because a lot of people, especially that they're starting their fitness journey, they see something, they kind of want to go that direction towards it, but in reality, it doesn't serve a function that you're going for, especially in the realm of strength training.
Yeah.
Or core strength training, I should say.
Well, with anything you do in exercise, you have to ask the question, why? And, what is this benefiting for me? And is it worth the time it takes for me to do it? Because we don't have a lot of time in the gym. We don't want to waste it on stuff that is going to be least effective. And so when it comes to core training, I'm not going to mess around with that stuff. I'm going to go on to the next thing that's going to make my core stronger, that'll enable me to utilize that core, which utilizing the core in exercise is also going to help strengthen it. I mean, when you're doing squat, deadlift, bench press, rows, all that, you're still utilizing the core. Having a strong core allows you to pull on the muscles that are attached to that core more effectively and get stronger. And so once you start squatting heavy and heavier, you're continuing to work that core. So why waste a lot of time on those smaller core muscles that are now, they're to a functional level. They're going to develop as you build greater strength. Build the greater strength. Don't go after all that sexiness.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
So speaking of building the greater strength and the core muscles and the functionality, we talked about exercises that we can do in a standing position, especially with that rotation. I think we very subtly talked about things lifting over above our head, but let's dive into that a little bit, but then let's also talk about the inverted funnel.
Okay.
With the whole lower.
Yeah, I think we might be getting a little bit ahead with the inverted funnel, because I think, that we'll come back to that. Let's say that the inverted funnel we've talked about before when it comes to moving in a more agile direction. I mean, you need to stabilize your core, and as we move multi-directionally, the movement is being performed by the direction of the hip movements, so hip flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, whichever direction we're going, we're using a solid core to stabilize ourselves, and then we're using the muscles of the hip, or you can actually even kind of extend it even up to the upper body, but that tight core allows us to move. But when you think of why we train for like agility and certain plyometric drills, you worked with me when I had the Athletic Republic facility, and that was one of the big foundational aspects of the training there was and it was John Frappier who first coined the term the inverted funnel and used it on those plyometric floor exercises that were really great for agility. But the idea is that by strengthening that core, we can move more effectively. And you think of back to Newtonian physics, the object in motion tends to stay in motion unless acted on by another force. When we are moving, or say you're an athlete running in a certain direction, you need to change direction. If you have weak core muscles, your body's center of mass is going to continue to move in a direction. Even though you've stopped your feet and are attempting to change direction, your body is still moving in that direction until the muscles contract to alter the direction of that movement. So we have some acceleration, deceleration going on within the core as well, which is kind of the end progression of core training. But as we're running, if we have a strong core, and you look at like a running back, a really, really great running back in the NFL, when they cut, their bodies do amazing things. I mean, it's like their trunk just stops on a dime, and then their legs are doing funky things going off in all different directions. Because they have a strong core, is they stop that motion, immediately the core contracts, stops the forward or directional progression of the body, and now contracts to help alter that direction. And so kind of the end goal, I think, of core training is to have that capacity to move effectively in multi-directions. And so when we start looking at progression, I think the Pallof press and some other exercises might help now with the anti-flexion, anti-extension. But then also, we move into flexion and extension in multi-directions and rotation in multi-directions. Another exercise that I really like is kind of a standing stiff arm pull down. So you basically kind of stand with a straight bar, cable attached, or the cord attached to a higher point, and you're going to just kind of lean into it slightly. So you're contracting the abdominal muscles, and then you pull that bar down, like almost like in a pullover, down to your hips, and then bring it up. And that really engages those hips in that kind of anti-flexion, anti-extension direction. And is a really great exercise to kind of supplement something like, say, the Pallof press. And then we want to get into, what are the things that we can do more dynamically to move the core, muscles of the core in multi-directions. And I think some really good tools to use there. I speak a lot of the Bulgarian bag. Anybody that knows me knows that I am drank the Kool-Aid for the Bulgarian bag. I love the Bulgarian bag as one of my primary core exercises, because you can do the stuff that is a bit more flexion extension, a lot of rotation multi-directionally. You do the spins. So all those movements are acting not only on the muscles of the abdominal core, the abdomen and the lower back and that trunk area, but they're also acting on the muscles stabilizing the neck, working a little bit with the shoulders, which isn't technically core, but it acts all the way down through the hips, the knees, and the ankles, which are those things that we really want to focus on when we're looking at kind of a active, dynamic core strength.
So what about combining the two, like combining a plank with that active movement? I'm talking more like mountain climbers or ski abs or things that you're on the ground, you're in a plank position, and you're still working the hips and you're bringing them up or you're moving them side to side. What about that? Bringing that in to your core
I
training.
think those can work as well. The downside of those, and we're going to talk, I think, in an upcoming episode about high-intensity interval training, high-intensity interval resistance training, and that's where I think those exercises can kind of come in a little bit more to give us both the benefit of kind of core training as well as working more muscle endurance. The downside of those is that as fatigue kicks in, we start to lose technique of those, and the core tends to kind of fall apart a little bit. We're not getting quite the same amount of core work that we would ordinarily. And so they can be good, but again, I'd focus on what are we trying to accomplish core-wise? Does it have more of a anti-rotational, rotational component to it, flexion, extension, anti-extension, anti-flexion component to it? Is it dynamic and multi-directional? Then it's a more or less appropriate exercise. And so kind of back to like the Bulgarian bag and that multi-directional piece, what we're doing is we are coordinating the muscles of the core in both acceleration and deceleration, which makes it much more functional. And you know how much I love talking about functional strength training, but it makes it more applicable to the things that we're going to do, whether we are just an aging adult just wanting to live well and have good longevity, or if we are looking at an athlete or developing young athletes. All of that is going to be important, but we want to continue to kind of progress the exercises that are going to give us more of that dynamic nature to it. And so medicine balls are also good in regards to kind of throwing motions. The thing I like about the Bulgarian bag versus medicine balls is it stays in my hands and I don't have to chase it. But there are things that we can do, throws, you can do, ball slams. A lot of that stuff is really good for the core because it gives it more that explosiveness, that acceleration, deceleration. And so look at what am I trying to accomplish with the activity, and what can I do to kind of better that performance. Any other core exercises that you tend to think of that we could kind of explore a little bit more here?
Not so much. I mean, the other stuff's just flashy, but a lot of the things that you're talking about, especially with the Bulgarian bags, one of the first things that kind of popped in my mind is what farmers do. They're picking up the bags of whatever and bringing it over their shoulder, or if they're out in the field and they got to chop wood, they're taking the axe and they're rotating it up, slamming it down. It kind of ties in with that functionality that we're talking about. There are specific movements that you see it in a gym and you're like, I'm not really going to use that, but we kind of are. If a little kid's walking by us, you pick up the kid, you are engaging your core strength in
your own kid.
Well, I'm not like slamming them down. It's not like
picking up somebody else's kid.
Yeah, when your kids, you're coming by, you pick them up. Hello. So
Not sure if anybody got a visual on that one, but
That's okay.
but yeah. So I mean, we're using the core so much, and then so it's all those exercises that are giving us that type of movement. And then we mentioned kind of the plyo floor that Athletic Republic utilizes in their programming, and John Frappier developed in his programs. That type of movement where we are doing what we often refer to as agility is kind of the next level of really core training. And unfortunately, a lot of coaches, when they focus on agility, they focus on the feet. It's like doing ladder drills. I'm not a big fan of ladder drills other than for basic warm-ups, kind of getting the limbs moving, getting the blood pressure up, getting a little bit of that neural activity going. But if you're not looking at how the trunk is functioning in those movements, you're losing all the opportunities, because what we want to be focused on is how is the core stabilized to allow for those feet to change directions effectively. And so just simply moving multi-directionally, whether it's in a pattern, like the plyo floor where it's forward, backwards, diagonal, right, left, or going, around kind of clockwise around a target, or if it is, setting up, a lot of times you'll see in agility drills people using either foam pads or little hurdles, and then jumping multi-directionally, whether it's on 1 foot, 2 feet, and changing those directions. I think those are really good activities that begin now to focus on the core. But again, you got to be looking at what's the trunk doing as they're doing those movements. If we're jumping and kind of the whole center of mass is moving this whole wide direction, we're not utilizing the core quite as effectively, and it's not going to transfer to better performance either in sport or just in day-to-day activities. And so again, focusing in on strengthening the core, stabilizing the core, and being able to move the hips with that core being stabilized. Same with upper body. We do, you kind of mentioned farmers. We talk about like farmers carries, briefcase carries. There's tons of different variations of carries. But essentially, it's just loading the trunk by kind of loading the limbs either in a balanced fashion or unbalanced fashion, either kind of at the hips or overhead, combinations of those. And the combinations are good because they're stressing the core in multiple different ways that the core now has to stabilize itself on these kind of unusual loads. And I think those are great activities to do as well. I like kind of ending most workouts with some kind of carry, whether it's just simply a farmer carry or an overhead carry or briefcase carry, balanced, unbalanced, in order to progress those and strengthen those. But again, when we're doing those, there needs to be a progression. We don't just keep using the same weight repeatedly and think we're getting anything from it.
So it's almost like stay away from the trendy six-pack abs, the crunches, and if you're going to train your core, train for functionality, because just like you said in the beginning, your core it's not just the rectus abdominis, it's everything from your neck to your hips, essentially, and you literally use that daily for almost every single movement that you're doing, whether it's a rotation, whether it's lifting something above your head, whether you're walking, you're using your core daily. So put in the work to keep it stable, keep it.
And don't worry so much about the core showing. That's fine if that's what you want, but remember too that the leaner we get, the more it begins to negatively impact our health and immune system and some of those types of things. We really, unless genetically we are predisposed to being that lean, or we just have produced so much muscle mass that it's almost impossible to eat enough to be putting on more body fat. Don't be focused on that as our only goal for core training, because then you are going to become more susceptible to just doing a 20-minute workout of abs. And again, if you're doing 20 minutes of core exercise at the end of a workout, you're really, I wouldn't say wasting time, but you're kind of wasting time. You're not really doing anything that's going to further your overall performance, your overall health. You do the basic core stuff that allow you to do the bigger lifts well, and that's going to have, greater return on your core strength and on your physical appearance as well as your physical performance.
So one thing we didn't really talk about, we talked about great exercises that we can utilize in order to get that functionality of the core muscles. What's your opinion on stretches and stretching the core muscles, right? Because a lot of times, especially in the core, especially those upper part of your back, I mean, that gets a little stiff and rigid. Would you say throwing in either athletic stretching or a form of yoga, or maybe like whatever the dancers do, to get that blood flow, get that range of motion, get that flexibility in order to increase the functionality of your workouts with your core strength?
All right, you've opened up a whole nother can of worms kind of in there as well. Stretching, to me, you need to have mobility, being able to move through a functional range of motion necessary to perform the activities that you're doing. Flexibility, just for the sake of flexibility, isn't necessarily a good thing. And when we're talking core strength and core stability, stability and flexibility are kind of on the opposite ends of the spectrum. And so we want to balance between the two. We want to be able to be stable, to be able to support the vertebral column, but we also want to be able to move it. And this is why I think a dynamic approach to core strengthening is beneficial, because you are moving both in acceleration, deceleration, multi-directionally throughout the movements that necessitate the use of the core. And so if you are finding, okay, I got this tightness in my upper back, then definitely, be stretching that. Or, your lower back is tight, stretch it out. We should have good flexibility in terms of having a good range of motion. But we can go overboard on flexibility just like we can go overboard on, crunches and, less important core exercises. And so I would emphasize stretching for the areas where maybe posture is being affected or performance is being affected or you have pain that needs to be corrected. But overall focus on mobility and stability rather than just merely flexibility, if that makes any sense. I think, we can get overboard with the stretching and people do the same thing. So, you got people doing 20 minutes of ab work and then 20 minutes of stretching. That's 40 minutes of exercise that, you can argue how much benefit there is in that. I would focus much more on the strength, the cardiovascular aspect of your training, and do it in a way that you are improving and utilizing your core strength and through a range of motion that is going to be most functional for your lifestyle, and kind of go with that.
So overall, train for functionality that's the best thing.
Yeah, and I probably prefer performance as opposed to functionality, because again, functionality tends to get kind of lumped in. We start talking functional training, and then we get all mixed up into a lot of the, not necessarily the Instagram kind of stuff, but kind of what I would consider more prehabilitative type of exercise, and not start getting the big picture of training and getting the big improvements. So, we want to be able to function well, to perform well. And as we talk about aging well, we want to be able to maintain that functionality, that performance as best we can as we age. And that should be the goal of exercise. For most, when you're younger and you're an athlete, yeah, it's performance driven. But once you kind of get beyond the sport aspect of training and conditioning, it has to be more function, performance, longevity as your primary goals of doing the exercise. And if it doesn't meet those, if it's merely just an aesthetic type of activity and it's not going to help you really perform better, then you might want to reconsider how you're utilizing your time if you don't have time to do a lot of exercise, which majority of people don't have. So to me, the whole goal of good core training is, again, performance and function, but also aging well.
Well said.
Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.